Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Alexandra Vandekamp. I'm Executive Director of Gemini Inc., San Antonio's Writing Arts Center. And I'm so thrilled you've decided to spend your Friday afternoon with us here at the San Antonio Book Festival with two absolutely fabulous poets, Laura Van Prooyen and Joanna Klink. I'm going to be the moderator for today's session. The title of our session, which is a pretty great one, is Moving Through Memories, Poetry Across Passages of Time and Space. And we're going to be celebrating two recent books by Laura and Joanna that talk very much about the passage of time, kind of the surreal aspect of being a body on a planet, and more beyond that. So I'm very much looking forward to having a conversation with them. I'll ask them some questions. They'll be reading some poems connected to those questions. And then we will be opening it to a general audience Q&A for the last 15 minutes. So feel free to post questions in the chat for that. So let me introduce our two poets. Joanna Klink is the author of 5 books of poetry, most recently The Night Fields, which was published by Penguin last July. She has received awards and fellowships from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, the Trust of Amy Lowell, and the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation. She teaches at the Michener Center for Writers in Austin, so we're our neighboring city. And then Laura Van Prooyen is the author of 3 collections of poetry, Francis of the Wider Field, Our House Was on Fire, which was nominated by Philip Levine and winner of the McGovern Prize, and Inkblot and Altar. She's the managing editor for the Cortland Review and teaches in the low-residency MFA Creative Writing program at Miami University and independently. And we're so thrilled to have them here together to join us for this poetry conversation on what is today, April 9th? So I thought I'd begin, Joanna and Laura, talking about book titles. So you both have pretty amazing book titles, Francis of the Wider Field and Night Fields. And I couldn't help but notice quite interestingly that both of these titles have the word fields in it. And so I thought we'd start with maybe having you both talk about that. Titles can be either really difficult to come up with for a book, or they're kind of this wonderful surprise and it's easy to create and find your title. But regardless, your titles are fascinating. So can you tell us a little bit about the process to your titles and maybe how they relate to these two recent books? You want to begin, Laura, and then Joanna obviously follow?
Yes. Thank you. Thanks for this question, because when Joanna and I were paired together, I noticed that as well. And then I came to see the sensibility, our poetic sensibilities were similar. And I was like, I wonder what happened with that titling with fields. So in my case, field works on many levels, beginning with a very literal level of many of these poems, the landscape. There's a lot of fields. I grew up in a landscape that was literally onion fields that morphed. So I grew up in a place that was rural. In my childhood, became suburban. In my later years, became a place where people migrated from the city because it was right on the edge of Chicago. So there was all of these fields that were quite present, but also thinking about various other fields like the celestial fields, the wide open fields of perception, the open field on the page. So Francis being a primary sort of touch point character in this book, the Francis of the wider field, she is kind of this presence that embodies all of those things. I'll turn it over to Joanna.
Yeah, I feel like there's a kind of resonance between our poems, and I'm so happy to be doing this with you today. And I think if I had to describe the process of choosing a title, that's kind of an agonizing process. But in this case, I just made up the word because I like Germanic compound nouns, and so I think, but I guess in the first instance, I was thinking about fields, like a space that you find yourself in or you enter into that lets you get your bearings, as Laura was saying, celestial fields or, fields that you wander into. And they give you a sense of scale because you're small and you're planted there. And it's in a vast place with these moving energies, so night fields for me I was thinking about those times when you step outside late at night or at dusk and you take the measure of who you are against this vastness. And it could be because of the blurring boundaries of dusk or just this ancient order of stars and time. Something makes you feel like you have a better connection to mystery or orders of mystery, I guess. And of course, as Laura was saying, a poem is also a field. It's like all these modernist poets like Eliot and Langston Hughes and Charles Olson, they were talking about a poem as a field of action where something occurs. And for poetry, it's a sonic field and it's a visual field. So it's music and it's the visual field and it's also a field of breath. So it's all these things happening at the same time, and it makes you feel like your life has been sort of lifted. It's like a moment in time where your life is lifted up and given certain rare energies.
I love the idea of the poem as a field of action and being a sonic field or a visual field. And I think both of you use that field in quite interesting ways. There's several poems in your collections that, for lack of a better word, don't look traditional. You know what I mean? Like they're scattered and they're kind of using that space in ways that I like and are unexpected. And there is a lot of vastness in your poems, Joanna. You know what I mean? Where there's like the human being set against vastness. So it's interesting you're bringing that up. Was there any, just to touch on this a little bit more, did you approach these two poetry books with a sense of expanding the field of your poetry in any way? And just feel free to jump in, Laura or Joanna, or no, it's just, you found yourself doing things along the way, but it was more of a discovery than maybe an intention at the beginning of the project, or both.
Maybe I'll just jump in because I feel like I was trying to do something new with this book in writing poems that had to do with an actual place, the rodent crater. So that was something, a new energy I kind of wanted to harness. But I think I was also trying to find a new voice or a new way of expressing some of the sorrow in my life and these kind of losses that keep piling up as you get older. And I actually believe that that states of grief widen the aperture of feeling. They seem to let us, perceive the world more acutely and more fully. And I think that's why I love Laura's title so much, because Francis of the wider field, the field is widened by grief. Like we become more expansive in the face of grief. And I guess in these night sky poems I was writing, I was looking for a way or a voice somehow to express that kind of deepening and widening that happens when, when there's just acute loss.
No, that's beautifully said. Yeah, sorry, go on, Joanna.
No, that's.
Well, I was going to say, similarly, moving to trying to find a new way into a new set of ideas, and similar to writing toward grief, this book was a big attempt at writing toward absence, writing into the things that are unknown, like sort of trying to solve mysteries that are unsolvable, that are closely related to grief and loss and absence. And so, you know, the grasping toward those things. And I like what you said, Joanna, about that widening field. I forget exactly how you phrased it, but that grief is part of that widening field, or it gets us closer to it.
Yeah.
No, that's beautifully said. Why don't we hear some of these poems from these two great books that are kind of taking on some of these concerns? Joanna, you want to begin with some of these night sky poems? So for those of you who have not had the delightful experience of reading her book in full yet, here's the book. Night Sky is the long sequence at the end. And I will let you, Joanna, describe this rodent crater that you mentioned. And I know there's the poem on page, let's see, the third and fourth poems of that sequence I love, and you can read those. But, you know, I'm happy to have you choose which maybe first two night sky poems you'd like to share with us. And then Laura, I'll be happily asking you to read some of your own after that. But you want to tell us a little bit about this rodent crater and what kind of gave birth to this night sky sequence?
Yeah, well, I've always loved James Turrell's work because he's so preoccupied with light as a subject. And I had been doing some reading about this volcano of his called the Rodent Crater. And for those of you who don't know, it's an extinct volcano that he has been transforming into a kind of subterranean open air observatory, like an observatory for the perception of time. And I've been trying to go there, but it's, you know, it's under construction, and it's only partially opened at this moment. And so what I did was I imagined what it would be like to be there, and I stationed myself on the edge of the volcano looking out at night. And so all these night sky poems are written, they're a voice that's speaking to somebody who is looking out at the night from that angle. So I'll just read two then. We were born into deathbed photos and charred trees, swallows, barns, coats of arms, and cannot say why we were put here, cannot say what we should do. The oceans of the earth emollient gold, rising powers flung back into ravenous depths. The desert's black rubied night sands. And still we hoard and lay blame. We take what we need. Races murder races for land without mercy, and dawn is never withheld. There is a heat born in you that outlasts you. There are burning circuits of stars. Where is your life? After all, we have seen the riches. We have known of each other at every hour. Dark summer grass, lightning bugs in their slow flashing. The night above you was more in you than your breath, the stars always shifting in your chest. How many days rippled through you until they were years? They were suddenly a life. Shadows of roses or shadows of buildings, months of sickness, lost keys. A neighbor you didn't greet. We are coming and going, night streets and dawn streets, the blurred mineral ground we walk on. Just before death, no one speaks with hatred. Above you, the night clouds race and then slow. A beetle burrows into work. Your arms are the quiet inside trust. your hands as fragile as snow.
That's so beautiful. I love how, and everyone, this is the third and fourth poems of the sequence on page 59 and 60 in the book. I love how at times in your poems you just ask these questions, Joanna, like, where is your life? I don't know. I don't know if I would ever have thought of asking that question in a poem. And the way it comes, the timing of it, it's a heartbreaking question. And then but then it's also one that really allows the reader and speaker to really, dwell in where their life has, or how the strange arrivals in life. We find ourselves arriving all the time, right? Every minute, every second. And so I just love how you let yourself ask questions like that. You know what I mean?
I would just
go on.
I would just say that sometimes when, well, Laura, you probably feel this too, like when you're writing, you have these moments where you're asking yourself, like, who are you and who do you think you are? Like in the most kind of pared down way, like appalling way, and you're trying to just get a handle on it. So it has a lot to do with levels of confusion in oneself, No,
that's great. And also in the poem you just read, shadows of roses or shadows of building, months of sickness, lost keys. I can't help but think of, The Art of Losing by Elizabeth Bishop, how she has that great, is it a villanelle? I forget, but that great poem. And so I feel like it's just beautiful how you're able to invoke those everyday losses, which can really add up in those images. So those are just beautiful. I love those. And how many poems overall are in the sequence, The Night Sky?
I did 31. It was supposed to be across the month. So every night.
Oh, cool. So everyone, those are just 2 out of 31 stunning poems. We'll probably have you read a few more, Joanna, too. And I guess Laura, I'd love to, to talk a little bit about some of the, wonderful aspects of your new book of poetry. And of course, I want to ask about Frances, because she's such a wonderful character. I think of her as like kind of your Ariel. You know what I mean? Like, is she an angel? Is she a ghost? Is she a friend? Is she, I don't know, that older sister that you kind of like some days and don't like others? She's just wonderfully hard to categorize. Can you talk a little bit about her, what you thought maybe was her role in this book? Not to reduce it at all, but just to talk about her.
Sure. I sort of love that you threw out all of those options, because it could be all of them. Frances, I guess Frances began because of the grappling with those absences, grappling with unanswerable questions. And Frances became this touchstone of an entity that might have answers or comfort or not, or anger even, could have a lot of things. Like on a literal level, Frances is sort of, well, she's not on a literal level, but the background behind it is drawn from my trying to grapple with some stories I grew up with in my childhood, which is when I was about a teenager, my mom shared with me that her mother died giving birth to her. And I found out later as an adult, like actually just this year, that I was the only one she told this to, when my siblings didn't know. I was the youngest, so I was sort of hanging around at home a lot. And she showed me a picture of her mom and told me this story. And it explained a lot too. My mom has been chasing this absence her whole life, and the void is there. It's there still to this day. And my mom and I are very close, and I would see this. So And as my mom is aging, she's having a lot of failing memory and issues with this. And so these questions will never be answered for her. And that's what started me writing into this, was these questions will never be answered for her. And now maybe I'm going to try to find some way into these things. And then it morphed into something much different and larger. But that's kind of where that came from, how Frances became sort of a touchstone of that grappling.
You want to read one of your Frances poems?
Yeah.
I love Frances of the Pleiades, but you can read, if you have another one you prefer, because they're all great.
I would love to read that, especially because I like how these poems are in conversations with Joanna's work as well, with thinking about the stars, so many stars. So Frances of the Pleiades. The afternoon has grown quiet, Frances. My cat's ear turns toward the sound of chimes. If I said, God is in the air, I could as easily have said, the child's uncreased face is a revelation. What does this matter to you? You're the jingle of keys. You're the motorcycle revving a block away. See, today was full of auspicious signs. And though you never believed in stars, it's you rising as my neighbor scuttles home from work. Is it wrong to say there's something luminous in my blood? Is it possible that the girl who buried the gecko covered you with stones? Frances, of all things and of no things. Don't get angry when I sing the wrong words. Don't forget the peppermints, white as stars, wrapped in tissue. Memory cannot undo the future. Frances, if I said, tonight I thank the seven sisters, it's really the blue dust of God between them, or you.
Wow. Yeah. I don't know. I love all the leaps in that poem. There are great stars too, right?
Well, and that came from, you were talking earlier about West Texas and some of these places. Maybe that was before we signed on, but being there at the observatory was out at, I think, the McDonald Observatory, was the first time I had seen such black skies here in West Texas. You can actually see the Andromeda with the naked eye out there, which is pretty amazing. So,
and I love how these everyday details are kind of transformed in your work, Laura. My cat's ear turns toward the sound of chimes, and then all of a sudden it's like, if I said God is in the air, I could as easily have said the child's uncreased face is a revelation. So just beautiful. I love the questions in this poem too. Is it wrong to say there's something luminous in my blood? My day's made better just by reading that question. You know what I mean? It just really opens things up. Do you want to read one other Frances poem? Just one other while we're on Frances?
Sure. Let me find.
Like Frances of the Cadillac, or whichever one you feel like. Yeah.
No, I would love to. Sorry, I just need to find the page of that really quickly. Frances of the Cadillac.
Yeah, Frances of the Cadillac. Okay, great.
Yeah. Under her tongue, there was a story. In her mouth, nails. Frances hammered license plates to the back wall of her garage. There hang the years that sunk like a foot in loose soil, that rusted like a hinge. Whose hand or what machine etched the numbers that cruised along in the exhaust of a town that no longer exists. This is what happens when I check my wristwatch. Frances drives her leather-topped Cadillac between the electrical signals of my brain. There's a railroad crossing, and I don't understand the way she's looking at me. Her body tells me something happened. Her arms so thin, veins show when she rolls up her sleeves. Still, if I were drowning, I know Frances would save me. She might throw a string of black pearls. She might offer a broom handle worn from her sweeping. She'd pull me to the edge, push pennies from my lungs. But it's the bells of the crossing that make it hard to breathe.
Love that. I love the slightly interesting way she might try to save you, you know, and beautiful. She might throw a string of black pearls, you know. Yeah, no, this is a wonderful character and presence in this book. And everyone, there's a lot of other great Frances poems in Laura's collection. So thanks so much for just sharing these two with us, Laura. And I love how, you know, the idea of, it's, you know, that we end on the idea of breathing and to breathe in this poem as well. Joanna, you have also a lot of great stars in your poems. And I kind of love that aspect of it. I mean, it's kind of a great part of sort of what I would call the geography of this book, Nightfields. Do you want to talk, might sound a little silly, but did you set out to write with so many stars in this beautiful book, or were they kind of popping up? You want to talk about that a little?
Yeah, well, I'm just now thinking about all the times I've told my students never to put stars in their poems, or like, I think I outlawed moons and cicadas, dew and stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, I guess for me, I'm always trying to connect small, imperfect, partial, inconsequential things with, you know, the vastness or the sense of immensity that's there, you know. And so I think stars are one way you look out at them, and there's something, I don't know, I feel like there's a connection between the tiny parts of ourselves. Like in one of my earlier poems in the book, there's a line, somewhere insects are brushing the lamps and stars have slipped in their dome over us, their positions fixed, intact, and perfect. And there's something that I love about looking at, because you see this dome and you know it's just this stunning perfection against your own, you know, inconsequential imperfection, your flaws. And so I think that's part of it. But also in these poems in particular, I guess there's the part of me that believes with the poet Paul Celan that stars are those who have suffered and the ones we've lost, and that when you look out at night, that's what you're seeing. So the last poem in the night sky sequence, I say something like until the ones who suffer are understood, the blurred gowns of stars will stay lit. This sense of just having to listen and look and be connected to the people we've lost.
Do you want to read that final poem in the sequence? That would be great.
Yeah, let's see here. I did. Time of wind, time of dust, time of sky. You have no kingdom. The ones you love will die. And to be alone is hard work, takes a life of preparation. Underneath the scorched domes, you are inlaid muscle, spindle bone, a body of mistakes, but you are turning to carbon, sharded ice. You are the brief errand of what was given to you in unceasing splendor. It is enough to be the imagination of your heart. It is enough to spend your life trying just to listen. Someone hesitating, a man with no home, families pulled from boats at sea. Until the ones who suffer are understood, the blurred gowns of stars will stay lit. Your torso is the sound of one child calling, the sound of leaves in high gusts of sun. Barbed wire flowing through the dark.
Wow, I love some of the equations made in this poem. Like, your torso is the sound of one child calling. That's just, I'm going to think on that for a while, Joanna. And I love this idea of you are the brief errand, that we're brief errands. I just really thought-provoking, beautiful ways of trying to make sense of who we are and where we are, right, in the universe. And you have no kingdom. I mean, not to sound too English professory or anything, but you want to talk a little bit about just that one line, you have no kingdom? It's a really interesting one and intense one.
Yeah. I've actually had some people make fun of that line for that, and I do think it's pretty emphatic in a way, or sort of omniscient in a way that I have no right to be. But one of the things about the Night Sky poems is that I love sequences because I feel like you can take a position, you arrive at some realization in a poem, and then the next poem can completely undo it and spin you into another state. And the poem that comes right before this one, I feel like that's where I was thinking about Terrell and his staircases in Rodent Crater, that you just walk up the staircase into the clouds. You know, that's the way he's designed the oculus. And the previous poem is, it ends, there are nights when breath fills the stillness, days when your thoughts climb a staircase to clouds. Carry yourself into sky. Your life is open to you. And that sense of just, you know, it's wide open. And then the next poem comes in and says, you have no kingdom. You know, that's sort of like, in a way, I feel like that's my life. You just sort of swing back and forth between these extremes of thinking anything is possible and thinking that, you know, you're destined to not be in command of your life or not have agency in your life. And certainly I feel like in the past year that all the time I feel that way, you know, like none of us have a kingdom that we can count on, you know, but what we do have, and I think in this last poem I was trying to say, you know, you're the brief errand of what was given to you in unceasing splendor. Like you can be the errand of the splendor, even if you're here just for a moment. And if you're here for a moment, you can use your imagination and you can listen. And that in itself is it's a different kind of kingdom, but it's a way of being. And I think that gets at what you were saying about that your torso is the sound of one child calling, like this sense that when you're really listening to the world and to other people, things feel porous, and a child crying is not something that happens over there, but it's something that enters you and alters who you are.
That's great. No, it's beautifully said. I love that. Yeah, we all have been swinging back and forth in the last year. It's been one heck of a time, right? No, and I love that how you talk about sequences, Joanna, you know, how one poem can play against the other. So do you feel like when you have a sequence of 31 poems, for example, as you do in Night Sky, does it allow poems to play off of each other differently than, let's say, if they weren't in a sequence?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, it can get a little dangerous if you like sequences, as you know, like you can sort of give yourself over to that that sense of like, well, this moment didn't quite capture it, and maybe the next moment will, you know. But it also allows you to register states of real despair and disarray, and then as you go through it, you feel slowly that there's something that's coalescing that could hold you together. And I think that's what I was at least going for. I don't know if I did it, but like going for in the sequence, which is that by the end you would feel these orders of being a little more interconnected, and that they include, you know, the fullness of things includes all those moments where nothing holds together.
That was beautiful. Yeah, I love that idea of that kind of interesting range and kind of journey that a sequence perhaps can allow. I guess we are now at 3:36. Time is ticking away, so I think Laura, I'd love you to read another poem, and then we'll kind of see how time's traveling in this session, and kind of do the audience Q&A, more towards the last 15 minutes. But you have several just amazing poems in this collection, Francis of the Wider Field, and I love your poem, My Mother in the Winter Zoo. It's a poem that has so many different threads that are so deftly put together, and then it's just, wonderfully written. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that poem and how it came into being? And then we'd love to hear you read it.
Sure. I also want to say I take heart at something Joanna said about the wild swings and, in some cases, contradictions, how one poem we write might undercut another poem. It's not as if I've written this and now this is what I mean. And now I've written this and this is what I mean today, or whatever. But I really like that what happens in these large expanses is there's room for all of these wildly different ranges of perceptions and emotions, because dealing with grief and loss and absence, and in some cases, like the long journey of loss, which is like what memory loss is, going through this, that really spoke to me in a way that resonates, and probably with other poets who are on here listening as well. So thank you for saying that. My Mother in the Winter Zoo. So just a little bit about this poem. I lived for almost 10 years within a mile of one of Chicago's two zoos, of the Brookfield Zoo. So you could actually, when I would go running in the morning, occasionally you could hear lions roar from the street, not often, and the peacocks. However, there is this one particular Christmas that it really was like a fairy tale, kind of. The snow was unreal. And there's a line in here. Maybe I'll read the poem and then I'll talk about that. The next thing. Is that okay, Alexandra?
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, that sounds great.
Sure. This is My Mother in the Winter Zoo. 6 peacocks sit like fat jewels shining in a bare tree. It's Christmas and snowing so hard flakes pile high on telephone wires. We're nearly the only ones here. You say you came with your father to see the oldest living cockatoo before you knew how soon he'd be gone. You never thought to ask him who named you, or why at 5 you were dressed in your Sunday best to join him on his bus route, transporting German prisoners of war. You live in a habitat of loss, where you scratch at the poor diet of what you can recall, of what says, these are the people I'm from. You refuse to leave the lifetime of objects you've stored down to a braid of your childhood hair. And here We watch the pacing African wild dog whose paws should never leave prints in snow, whose breath in this cold ices his muzzle. The animal's worn path is a sorry replacement for its instinct to roam. There are times I want to disown my kind, but what's wild in me is tempered by the way your hands involuntarily shake. You say, let's make our way to the wolves. We look through the one-way glass, where within reach of us, the animal tears at a bone.
So do you want to talk a little bit about those German prisoners of war and this kind of like global history being kind of airdropped into this very personal memory, that kind of folding in of one with the other? Tell us a little more about that, Laura. Yeah.
Well, you know, the winter zoo anyway, this literal place, you know, it's also like that the slow loss of memory. The snow just keeps coming, right? It's going to be silent and buried. So these memories that of my mother's, one of them riding this bus, her father was in a partnership with his brothers. They had a bus company. And so one of his jobs, he actually had a route on the school bus to transport German prisoners of war from the Sweet Woods Forest Preserve in Thornton, Illinois, to the fields where they worked. So this was one of his many routes. And for some reason, unknown to any of us, he would take my mom along on these routes and dress her up. And she was always dressed in these really fancy, nice clothes, and was about 5 years old, I guess, and would sit in the front seat. And she says that she just remembers the men looking at her with a very deep sadness. And that's all she can recall. But this is stuck with her. And the school buses, you know, he would also drive kids to the zoo and things like this. So he would take my mom along to the zoo with all the school kids and things like that. So, but that sadness, that loss, it's like layers and layers and layers of loss in these memories. And absences too. These men were absent from their home and absent from their family and stuck in the middle of a Chicago suburb forest preserve, which is a strange situation. So.
No, and I love, but what's wild in me is tempered by the way your hands involuntarily shake. So there's all this like contained wildness, you know what I mean? We have, you know, the African wild dog whose paws should never leave prints in snow, but then these speakers' wildness and, but, you know, then this, you know, kind of heartbreaking, you know, just fact of the mother aging and everything. It's just beautiful. Laura, I just wanted to say that.
Well, yeah. But, you know, and also I just want to bear mention too, the heartbreak of the containment of the animals at the zoo as well. So, you know, another layering of that as well.
There's a little bit of sly kind of dark humor here because it's like, let's make our way to the wolves. You know what I mean? So, so there's just a lot going on in this beautiful poem. Thank you for reading it. It's really great. I would love, you know, both of you in your poems in both of these recent collections, you know, I feel like it's the speakers trying to take stock of things. You know what I mean? I think, Joanna, you mentioned earlier at the beginning of our discussion, you know, this sense of accumulating losses. I would love you just to read one short poem, Joanna, that's not of the night sky sequence. And it's Evenings and Days on page 19 in your book, because I feel like I just like the kind of taking stock a little bit that's happening in that poem. And I think it'd be great for our audience just to hear a poem of yours from another part of the book. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So this is the first poem, and it's like 3 poems, and yeah, okay. It's called Evenings and Days. Having woken many days, I still can't account for myself. At night on the floor, with books spread around me, vines black below the lamps. I read about the houses of the rich and the poor, a woman thinking, a woman combing her hair, the great pain that would come to a young man. You can hold an umbrella above your head and look out at deep calm, rain drumming to nothing. Walking through traffic, the steady roughness of engines, and in dusk or late evening, the grasses seem darker than trees. If you stare at something for a long time, you may come to trust it. That thin shadow of wire fence through dense heat was your life. And even so, you stepped past it.
I love that opening line. Having woken many days, I still can't account for myself. I think we can all sympathize with that, Joanna. Anything about just, what made this poem happen?
Oh, I think in this case, I was just trying to take stock of my life in some very, basic way, just sort of looking around and saying, who am I, and what's here still? And I think I was, what you articulated before, like that sense that it's really true what they say, you can miss your own life. It can just happen when you weren't looking, and then, and you make decisions and suddenly like things are gone, so I feel like I was trying to capture some of that. But I also think some of the Night Sky poems are trying to speak back to the personal, ego-driven stuff that's happening in the first part of the book. Because you can also dwell too much in what's happened to you, and you can be undone by your own despair, and sometimes you just need to forget yourself and be swept up in things so that you don't have to think about that, No,
I love that. And I think both of you have so much, breath in your poems, taking stock. And I think that's a terror we probably all have, like, oh my God, I missed my life, and I love this closing line. It's a memorable one, Joanna. That thin shadow of wire fence through dense heat was your life. And even so, you stepped past it. So I think I'll be thinking about that for a while, I think. Yeah.
I would also say that, like, I do believe too that the thing that gets us out of our own preoccupation with ourselves, and when we're too much involved with our own life, thinking about our own lives, it's just these really small moments. Like in one of the Night Sky poems, I talk about the shift to peace is just so soft, it's barely there. A scrape of gravel, the breathing of trees. It just, the tiniest thing can make you forget yourself and make you feel connected with everything in your life. And so I think we a lot of us sort of go back and forth between these extremes of like, oh, I missed everything. And then just the tiniest thing can make you feel connected with all of who you've been.
Yeah, that's wonderfully said. I think I know, and I'm not alone in this, like I've been finding immense comfort in birds. I think it's because, they're in your backyard. A lot of us, I feel like I've been lucky. I've been able to work at home during the pandemic, but it's also there's been difficulties with it. But I do love the birds because they're just doing their thing. They're fine. And they're amazing. They're flying around. And I have had that feeling just looking at a bird. And it's just wonderfully said. The small things near you can really, save you in some ways, right? Save us from ourselves a little bit. There's some nice questions coming into the chat from the audience. And everyone, if you would love to, to ask a question to Laura or Joanna, just put a question in the chat. I'll try to grab as many of them as I can and share them with the poets. I have, let me just, so we have a question from, give me one second, from Juliana, and I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly, Forkuharsen. And do you wait for inspiration or write all the time? So do you want to kind of answer that writing process question? Yeah, Laura, you want to begin? Yeah.
Sure, I write regularly. Not as so the pandemic, I will admit, was a really hard time. But I'm finding my way out of the fog. So one of the things that I'm doing right now, and I do it periodically, is I will take like a challenge of writing a draft of something per day. I don't sustain this for long periods of time, but I'm doing this right now, and I might do that when things are going well 3 to 4 times a year. So, or 3 to 4 months a year, like maybe kind of quarterly. And really it's a way to generate a lot of material. So then there's not the terror of not having something to work on. And then I have plenty of things to sort through to revise. So I don't sit around and wait for inspiration, back to the root of that question, but really it's a practice.
Oh, I wish I could do that. I admire your ability to do that. I don't have a very fixed process. So I tend to just look for poems that inspire me, and then I write a poem in response to it. So it's not it's very scattershot.
Do you find yourself, Joanna, like reading a fair amount to try to find that poem to respond to?
Yeah, yeah, I do. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons I love to read, is you sort of read for a poem that really so speaks to you that you want to speak back to it. And I mean, a lot of the time I'm just reading poems that my students write, and which are dazzling, so that's its own glory, and then picking up random books of poems, old and new, and just sort of looking for something that on a particular day hits you, and so you want to be able to respond to it.
I love that idea of dialogue.
I've been doing that somewhat with some prose. I know I shared Joanna with you in an email, the pleasure of reading Joanna's book, but reading it while I'm also reading the writings of Thomas Merton, who he himself is a poet and a Trappist monk and a hermit, and at one time an English professor. So when you were talking about the getting out of ourselves and looking at the world around us to pull us out, that's been very much top of mind, because like in Merton, how the eye doesn't even really exist, our superficial external eye, but moving to that internal space, and how the presence of the divine is all around us. And so my latest stuff that I'm working on now is really actually driven toward those concerns and questions that you were bringing up, because I'm so tired of looking at the self. I want the self to just sort of like, I'm really ready to engage with the world. The last year has allowed the natural world to become, we've slowed down enough to notice it, but engage with my poetic world in a outward looking way is very much top of mind, but that's drawn from the reading. The reading is key in sparking these ideas, I think.
No, I love Thomas Merton. That's great that you're reading him now. I love that, Laura. We have about 6 precious minutes left with these 2 wonderful poets, and we do have some more questions in the chat from the audience. So I'll just read some of those. Joanna, this is for you. It's from Sean Dan Weber. You mentioned Paul Celan. What is it about his work that moves or inspires you?
Well, I've loved his work for a long time, and I've been trying to write a book on Ceylon for like 20 years, and I work on it, and then I put it away, and I work on it, and part of my never finishing it is thinking that I can't do justice to this poet I love so much, and I think part of my deep reverence for him is his ability to insist on the strangeness in poetry and say, you know, you're not going to understand every single line. You're not going to understand the full range of all my meanings. But you can be outside the message. You can be half outside the message and still feel it. You can not understand at some level, but still understand at the level of your heart and your senses. And that challenge to be able to be in the presence of something that doesn't make sense, but still feels important to you, like to receive a message that you don't fully grasp, but know that it can work on you in a certain way, is for me like the great joy in reading difficult poems that are hard to get, is that it's just a reminder that like, oh, this is how we move through the world. We encounter things that don't make sense all the time, and yet they make us feel things, and we can still understand at some level.
I love that idea of so it's kind of increasing our capacity for strangeness. That's great. I love how you describe that. And then we have another question: how has your writing process changed or been impacted during the past year? So Laura, you want to comment on that a little bit, and then Joanna, feel free to add in any way you want.
Sure. As I mentioned, it was really, I had a very difficult time reading or writing much of anything for a while. So that was how things were greatly impacted. Fortunately, through my friendships with people who really value reading and writing, I was able to be in conversation even when things were tough that way. So started reading with my friends again, sharing books, talking about them, and that opened me up to finding my way back to, I also, I meditate regularly, so sitting in stillness really helps.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. I would say that I haven't figured it out. I had a terrible year. I didn't get much writing done, and I'm just trying to hold things together minimally, but I think you're absolutely right, though. Like, there's a kind of clarity of mind that has to precede writing. You have to like be grounded in order to be receptive.
So does anyone, we're happy to take one or two more questions, amazing audience out there. So feel free to leave some questions in the chat. We have like 2 minutes left, so I'd love us to, that's really not enough time to read a poem. I did want to mention that Laura has these great 2 poems that I love in her book. And she has the guts to just call one Tuesday. And then a little later in the book, it's next Tuesday. So we won't have time to have her read those, but do you want to talk about those Tuesday poems just for like 2 seconds, Laura, and then we'll finish out? Yeah, because they're great.
Thank you. And I'm really happy that you responded so well to them, because those are sort of, how you come around and you have ones you read all of the time. Those aren't really among the greatest hits of what I, bring out when I'm reading. So I sometimes when I like thinking about the days of the week, and a Tuesday is sort of an interesting day in that the weekend is behind you and you're not quite, it's a very ordinary, regular kind of a day. And so just regular things happening, but deep questions happen on very regular, ordinary days, couched in between all of the mundane things that have to happen, such as fixing a roof, which is the context of both of those poems. And the roof you can try to fix it and it won't work. And so then there's the next Tuesday. You might get another try.
Yeah.
No, they're great. I love the roof repairman called Angel. So I won't give too much more away, but please check those out in Laura's collection. And I wish we had more time to talk. It's already 4 o'clock. Thank you so much, Joanna and Laura. It's been wonderful talking to you. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us for this poetry conversation. Please check out these poets' books, Francis of the Wider Field by Laura Van Prooyen and Night Fields by Joanna Klink. And thank you so much for being with us today. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.